I'm Sarah Bond. I am a certified dog behavior consultant and certified professional dog trainer, knowledge and skills assessed, which is the letters after my name. So what I'm going to go ahead and do in just a second is share a PowerPoint with you guys, and I'm going to talk through it and talk about some different strategies for dealing with leash reactivity, which is a very common issue that has some really simple ways that we can work on it and find some solutions. So let me go ahead and get this PowerPoint up on the screen here for you guys. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. So again, this is my name and my letters. I have been a trainer since 2008, so for about 12 years. And I do specialize in dogs who have behavior problems like aggression and anxiety. So what I want to talk about today is, leash reactivity, which is one of the things that I hear people struggling with the most. So we're going to go through this presentation together. Okay. Why do dogs react on leash? Lots of common misconceptions about this. I frequently have people ask me if their dog is reacting because they are being dominant or if they're being aggressive. And there are so many reasons that dogs can react. One of the most common ones is actually fear. So many dogs will react because they feel like they need to defend themselves and they feel like something is a threat. Frustration is also a really, really common reason that dogs will react on the leash. And this happens a lot with dogs who are very social and really would like to go and say hello to another dog or a person and can't get to them. The leash itself acts as a restraint. So there is some level of frustration or feeling trapped that can happen for a lot of dogs. Other reasons that could be part of it, resource guarding sometimes is a reason. If they see their person as a resource, we get into some elements of the fight or flight concept because they can't get away. We're kind of taking away the flight option. So we go down to like fight or freeze. Overstimulation is a really common reason as well. And predatory drive can sometimes be the case. So that would be something like we see a squirrel and we want to go chase it. That can definitely be a factor for some dogs. Excitement is definitely in there, and that kind of goes along with the frustration element. And defensiveness, again, kind of goes along with fear or anxiety. There, again, are other reasons that they could be reacting. There are a lot of reasons, but generally, these are the most common ones. All right, so the first thing that we want to really be looking at is management. Safety is the most important thing that we want to be making sure that we're doing. And when we are working with a dog who is leash reactive, it's really, really important that we set them up to be successful. So we want to make sure that we have the right equipment to keep your dog safe and to keep yourself and others safe. So in most cases, that's going to include a collar or a harness, a leash, and I do recommend a 4 to 6 foot fixed leash. I don't recommend for leash reactivity that you use a flexi or retractable leash because you're going to have a lot less control and your dog's going to have a lot more room to do things. They also tend to get wrapped around things a lot more easily and cause injuries. So a fixed leash is going to be a much better option in this situation. And for some dogs, a muzzle can be a good choice, and we will talk about that more in just a second. But generally what I'm talking about there is a basket muzzle. You want them to have room to pant inside the muzzle. You want to be able to feed them through the muzzle, and you want them to be comfortable in it. That's really important. And muzzles are generally a good option for dogs who maybe are a bite risk or who have a bite history already. So distance is the other thing that I want to talk about here before we get into some of the actual training, because one of the most common mistakes that I see is dogs getting too close to their triggers, and then it's really hard for them to be successful. Most dogs have a threshold where they are able to you know, before they get to their threshold, they're able to kind of be in their thinking brain and pay attention and, you know, listen to cues that they know and eat food. And once they hit their threshold and go over it, generally that's where they're reacting and they're not really in their thinking brain anymore. And so we want to make sure that they're at a comfortable enough distance where they can actually be listening and learning. That's very, very important as well. And finally, my big dog training rule is set your dog up for success. It is so important to help our dogs be set up to be successful. It's really easy to set them up for failure, but then they're just going to practice the things that we don't want them to do. So we want to set them up to practice the things that we do want. So here's just some pictures of some of the equipment that we talked about. On the left side there, we have the basket muzzle. That's a Baskerville Ultra. And I'm going to show you guys a little short video in just a second of conditioning the muzzle, the leash in the middle. And on the right side, on the top, we have a harness. I do love the harnesses that have both a front and back clip because it just gives you a lot more options and it can be a lot more comfortable and you can have a lot more control. I also like to have harnesses that give your dog plenty of space around their shoulders to move naturally so that we're not messing with their natural gait. So that harness in the picture there is a balance harness. There are a few harnesses that I like, but that is one of them. And then on the bottom, you have a martingale collar, which is just a normal collar, but it has an extra loop of fabric, which tightens just enough to not let it slip over your dog's head. So if you have a dog who is an escape artist, this can be a good option. In general, I do prefer to use a harness when possible, but there are times that a collar is a better choice, or maybe you need a collar and a harness for safety if your dog tends to be pretty good at pulling out of one or the other. All right, so in this video, you're just gonna see my dog Percy putting his nose in the muzzle voluntarily. My goal with muzzles is always that the dog is going to really like the muzzle. I want them to be excited about it and want to use it. So I start by pairing it with really good stuff. Generally, I use string cheese for muzzles, so I will pull off strings of string cheese and stick it through the holes so that your dog puts their nose in and kind of eats at it. And after a while, they start to learn that the muzzle coming out equals awesome stuff, and they get really excited about putting their muzzle on. And you just kind of condition them to it a little bit at a time, but this keeps the muzzle a positive thing, and it, you know, helps to not make any bad associations for your dog. So this is just Percy practicing with his muzzle. Muzzle? Yes. Muzzle? Yes. Okay. So the other skill that I like to kind of think about as part of management is emergency U-turns. You want to be able to walk away from a situation with your dog easily. And I see dogs frequently plant themselves or decide they're not going to move or lunge back towards the trigger. So practicing leaving can actually be a really important skill. And the way that I like to teach this is to start by luring them with a little bit of food. So I will start with my dog next to my side. I'll put the food kind of in my hand near their face, and I'm going to walk around them in a U. And if they come with me and follow me, I'm going to go ahead and reward them next to my side. So one thing I'll mention here, which will come up later, is markers for good behavior. So in a lot of the videos that you're going to see, you'll hear either a click or someone saying yes. And that's just them marking the dog doing something correctly. So the click and the yes both mean you did that correctly and a reward is coming. So generally, again, in this situation, I'm going to walk around them. They come with me, click or treat or yes, and then go ahead and treat next to my side. And I do have a little video demonstration here. This dog is actually going to go mostly all the way around in a circle. She kind of did 2 U-turns here, but it gives you an idea of what it looks like when you are practicing it. Yeah, right there, and then you're going to turn. My left or my right? Your left. Okay. So you're going to go kind of like around her. Perfect. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Good. Nice job. Click. Good.
Yeah,
Okay,
right there.
so let's talk about creating positive associations. We definitely want our dogs to enjoy the training and get some good feelings about what we're doing. It is super, super important that when we are working on leash reactivity, we are thinking about the underlying emotions that are going along with what they're doing. So we're generally trying to change a negative feeling to a positive feeling. We want to actually change why they're doing what they're doing. So we're not just putting a band-aid on it. We can teach them lots of other behaviors to do in place of it, but unless we change how they feel about the trigger, it's probably going to come back in other ways. So we do have to think about that. And you're going to see me using some of these kind of as part of the behaviors that we're teaching, but classical counter conditioning is basically just telling them that an unpleasant stimulus, something that they don't like, equals something wonderful. So, for example, a person walks into sight and they get chicken. Person leaves, the chicken stops. What they're going to realize after that happens several times is when a person appears, chicken happens. And so after a while, people equal chicken and people equal something good. Desensitization is slow exposure over time, and this is frequently misunderstood. So a lot of times people think this just means exposing your dog to things. And what happens with that is that a lot of times you end up with flooding, which is where you basically throw your dog into the deep end without teaching them how to swim. And that can actually make the problem worse instead of better. So you do have to make sure that if you're desensitizing your dog to something, you're starting at a level where they can handle it and where they're not overwhelmed and not going over threshold. So both of those are helpful, but generally what we want to do is kind of have a combination of creating a positive association and changing their behavior. So this part of it, what we're talking about right now, is just changing those underlying feelings. Especially helpful if you have a dog who, for example, is afraid or defensive, but it can be helpful for any dog. So here are some things that I like to avoid when I'm working on leash reactivity. And I'll talk about why in just a second. But generally, I do avoid choke collars, prong collars, electronic or shock collars, leash corrections, yelling. And what happens when we use these kinds of punishment-based behaviors is in the moment, it looks like it's working. Your dog is probably going to stop what they're doing if something hurts or if you yell at them, but you're creating more negative associations with the trigger. So long-term, you could end up with actually a much worse problem. And as someone who works with higher level behavior cases, like more intense aggression, I'm frequently getting called in from the fallout from using some of these tools. So not every dog is going to have that kind of fallout, but a lot of dogs, do, and we end up with, more serious problems in the long run. So I do not recommend these tools. There are other tools that I do recommend, and I'm always happy to answer questions about what I would recommend instead. Here are some things that I do recommend. You want to keep your leash relaxed. Tightening your leash tends to signal to your dog that you are tense. And so a lot of times when we tighten our leash, that is when the dog reacts. So do pay attention to that. You really want your leash to be kind of like a J shape or a U shape. You want it to be nice and relaxed. Carry treats on walks, and that sounds really simple, but is hard to remember for a lot of people. It does make a big difference. It really helps a lot if you bring some high value treats with you when you go on your walks. Watch your dog's body language. We will talk a little more about body language before the end today, but the most important thing with body language is you want to learn what your dog does before they react. Do they tense up? Do they stare? Do they put their ears back? Does their brow furrow? Does their mouth tighten? We want to notice the precursors, the things that happen before the reaction, because that's going to help us catch it in time to redirect to better behaviors. You also do not want to force interactions. If your dog does not want to say hi to people or is not comfortable with other dogs, do not make them say hi. You're more likely to have a negative, scary experience. and avoid triggering situations. So obviously, like if you live in an apartment complex, it's really hard to avoid dogs and people. So if that's a trigger for your dog, that can be really challenging. So, you know, we do want to do what we can, basically. If you can walk at quieter times of day, if you can duck behind a car when you see another dog or person coming, if you can walk in more open spaces like fields so that you can see triggers from a really big distance. You know, we just want to try to avoid being surprised or having, you know, the trigger come into our range where it's too close and it's really hard for our dog to handle the situation. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a few very specific training methods to work on with leash reactivity. And I'm only going to talk about 3 different things that I think are helpful. And there are dozens of options as far as things to work on with leash reactivity. So these are just things that I have particularly found helpful, that I think are really good tools and that I think are simple. And that's really a key, is we want to keep it as simple as possible. Because in the moment, if your dog is stressed out or you're stressed out, it's a lot easier to remember something really simple to do than it is to try to remember a complex behavior, or for your dog to try to perform a complex behavior. So we want to keep our behaviors really, really easy. We want our dog to be able to feel comfortable doing it and to do it pretty automatically. So the first exercise I'm going to talk about is a game called Engage, Disengage. And sometimes there's a very similar version of this called Look at That. And they are both really valid options. This is just the version that I tend to use myself. So stage 1 of Engage, Disengage, you're going to let the dog look at the trigger. You're going to click or say yes, and you're going to give him a treat. So literally all you are doing is rewarding your dog for looking at their trigger. What we are basically doing is a couple of different things. We are teaching them that when that trigger appears, good things happen. We are teaching them that looking at that trigger is good, because it's really fine for them to look. We just don't want them to lunge or bark or pull. And we are also teaching them that whenever that trigger appears, we're going to reinforce them, which means that after a while, they're going to start expecting something from us when the trigger appears. And so that kind of leads us into stage 2, where the dog looks at the trigger, the dog looks at you, you click or say yes, and you treat. And this happens naturally after you've worked on stage 1 for a while. Your dog will look at the trigger, and then, you know, after a second or two, when you haven't clicked or said yes yet, they look at you like, hey, where's my treat? And then you click or say yes and reward. And then you have a full behavior of look at the trigger, look at me for further instruction. So this is a really great exercise, and it can work really well. So I'm going to show you guys just a couple of videos for this. The first one is an example video with one of my dogs, and the second one is a real life video. So let's start with the example.
Engage, disengage is a great exercise for working on distractions. For this video, Clara is working off of a fake dog. Anytime she looks at the distraction of the fake dog, I'm going to say yes, or if you're using a clicker, you would click, and then I'm going to give her a treat. I tend to give the treat back a little bit towards me to help break her attention away from the fake dog. As you can see while she's practicing this, she starts to look back to me for the treat when she hears the yes pretty quickly. Our eventual goal will be to have her look at the distraction and then look back at us.
Girl.
But in this first stage, all we're worried about is rewarding her for looking at the distraction.
Yes. Yes.
So as we get closer, it gets a little bit harder, so she may get stuck. So if you need to move further away, that is always okay. If your dog is having a big reaction, it is better to be at a further distance than closer. We want our dog to be nice and relaxed and happy as we practice this.
Yes.
Okay, So this second video is a dog that I was working with in training. We were doing a day training session. So I had her out on a walk and we were working on not barking at people or dogs. So we are going to see her practicing in this video. So this is a real life, just people walking by in the real world video.
Yes. 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 Good girl. Yes, very nice.
And please excuse the camera moving around. Trying to video and work the dog at the same time can sometimes be a little challenging. But you can see in that video that basically she is still alert and still interested in the dog and person walking by, but she's not barking, she's not lunging, she's staying near me and kind of looking back. And eventually I'd like to see a little more relaxation, but this is a really good starting point. All right, so this is another cue that I really love to work on with leash reactivity, and that's a redirection cue. And so we're going to make this word their favorite word in the world so that every time they hear it, they want to like whip their head around to us. So I usually use the word here. I started using that years ago when I was working for Buddy's Chance here in Austin, teaching reactive dog classes, and they are no longer around, but that is where they kind of came up with this Far Beyond program that used this redirection cue of here. Similar to some other programs as well, but it really works very well and it's super easy to work on. We are going to condition the word to be awesome. So let's say that your dog's favorite food in the world is steak. We're going to pair the word here with steak. So stage one, say the word, offer the food right next to your leg. We do that several times. We do some sessions of that. And after a few sessions, when they hear that word, they should be really excited, like drooling like Pavlov's dogs, ready to go, wanting to come over to your leg and get that food. So we're trying to keep it really simple. We're not even looking for behavior in the beginning. And I'll show you that stage one video in just a second. Once we have that going, we're going to start adding in some general distractions, like sounds around the house, toys on the ground, things like that. And then we start to work on the trigger. So the sequence of behavior is you see the trigger, you say your redirection cue, and you reward your dog. So it is going to look a lot like the engage, disengage. Our goal is pretty much the same. I find that some dogs respond better to one, and some dogs respond better than the other. And sometimes it's nice to have both because the engage, disengage turns into kind of an automatic behavior. But if your dog gets a little stuck, it's nice to have that here to redirect them quickly. And again, the last thing I want to just kind of mention before I show you guys some video of this is we do want to start at a distance where the dog can listen. So if you are starting too close and your dog is just ignoring you, we're not really going to get any benefit out of that. We do need to start at enough distance where the dog is going to be able to hear the word, respond to it, and have a chance to get rewarded. Practice makes perfect, even with things that we don't want it to. So we don't want to give them chances to practice unwanted behaviors. So this is stage one.
Okay, so we're going to start with the here cue. So the first thing that I'm going to do is pair the word with food. So I want to use high value treats, and I basically am not really asking Clara to do anything yet. I'm just pairing the word here with good stuff. Here. The food should be delivered right next to my leg. Here. I want this to be super duper easy. Here. I say the word and then I put the food down. Here. I'm not really expecting behavior yet. I'm just pairing word with food. Here. As they get better at this, I can move further away, add distractions, and make it harder. Here. Good girl.
So that's about the simplest thing ever. Really literally just pairing the word with food. And then I have a little compilation video here for you guys of a few of my different students doing the here cue in in the world. So a few of these are during training sessions. Some of them happened naturally with actual real life distractions. The last one in the compilation is actually at a very, very busy park with the dog who is very dog reactive. Some of the dogs in this video are dog reactive, some are reactive to people. But what I want you guys to see here is the excitement in their reactions and how quick they are. Because that's what we're really looking for with this redirection cue. We want it to be super exciting, super positive. We want to have a like yippee kind of response to it, basically. So let's take a look.
Here.
Good. Almost. He did turn. Let's try it again.
Here. So calm.
Good. Nice job. I like that automatic look back. That's beautiful. Calm again.
Here. Here. Here.
Good boy, good boy.
Very nice.
Good boy, Case. You're doing great. Hey, Casey, here, yes.
That
good
is
boy.
awesome.
Good boy.
Okay. All right, so I would take him a little closer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Come on,
Just
Case.
not where they could reach each other in leash distance for sure,
Got
but
it.
a few steps closer.
Come on, Case. Right here. Good boy. I'm just gonna hang out here.
Yeah.
Casey, here. Good boy.
So those videos are all in different situations, different types of dogs, different triggers. I think one of them I was handling the dog, so you couldn't see me, but most of them it is the dog's person handling the dog. And this is generally something that we want to be simple enough that it's really, really easy to transfer from your trainer to you, or that you can even work on your own. It's, you know, pretty low risk to teach your dog that this word is awesome and then try it in different situations as long as you set them up to be safe. So it's an excellent tool. I've seen it have a lot of success for a lot of dogs. So I highly recommend working on a positive redirection cue. I think it's super helpful. All right. So the last tool that I'm going to talk about today is using your nose for treat parties. And this is one that is a little bit of a distraction, but also a reward. And there are some dogs that I find get kind of stuck and they have trouble not like having their head on a swivel looking at the trigger over and over again. And for those dogs, this can kind of give them a longer break. It's also great for dogs who tend to get a little bit overly wound up. Sniffing and using their nose is a great way to help bring them down a little bit and help them be calmer. So I like to give it a cue. Scatter is what I use with my dogs. I've had students that have used party, find it. You know, there's lots of options here. But what you want to do is say your word. So I would say scatter, and then take a small handful of food and scatter it on the ground and make it really obvious at first so they know what it is. And after a few times, when you say that, they're going to start looking for it immediately. So I usually just do a handful of kibble to start, but if you're trying to get them really excited about it and your dog is less food motivated, you can definitely use treats for this. You start by doing this outside of the times that you need it. And that's true for almost any training. You want to start with quiet times where your dog can handle it with new behaviors, right? You don't want to start a new behavior in the middle of the park. So do this at random times, try it around the house, and then eventually you can use it when triggers are passing. The one thing that I will say with this is you don't want to just distract your dog while triggers are passing. That's gonna, you know, in some situations you might need to just distract them for a minute, but it's not gonna give you long-term success as much. You know, we do want to actually be giving them some behaviors to do. So I mostly use this as a reinforcement for the other games that we're talking about here today. So I do have an example video for this one, and the dog in the video is just using the word yes to mean scatter because this is the way that it was the most effective for her to get reinforced. And this dog was reactive to people and dogs in her neighborhood. So we're standing in her driveway I'm working on engage, disengage, and I am using the scatter as her reinforcement.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So every time she looked up there, it was at one of her neighbors. And so I am trying to get her to kind of then use her nose and eat that food off the ground. And I am using Kibble in that, you might have noticed. This is a dog who has a lot of allergies and is incredibly food motivated. So Kibble worked great for her. In the majority of cases, if you are out in the world working with your dog, I am going to recommend using something a lot more exciting than Kibble. Kibble's like a $1 treat. You probably want a $100 treat when you're out in public. All right. So some early warning signs to watch out for, and this will help you with being successful with your dog. We want our dogs to, you know, be able to get out of bad situations before they turn into bad situations. So if you notice that your dog is really tense, that is something that you really want to watch for. If their muscles are tight and they're kind of straight forward and really tense, that's definitely a warning sign. And again, any of these body language things that we're talking about are, you know, contextual. So if there is other body language that's not matching up, we want to look at the overall picture. But tense body language in general is something we want to be aware of and careful of. Staring can definitely be a problem. So when dogs stare at each other, that's generally a lot more confrontational, and you'll see a lot of dogs get fixated on something and really stuck staring at it before they have a big reaction. So we do want to interrupt staring as early as we possibly can and help them to redirect into better behaviors. Raised fur along their hackles can mean a lot of things, but generally it means that they are in a more heightened state. So it is something to watch for. It does not always mean aggression, but it does mean that they are more wound up. Stillness, this is a big one. I much prefer to see a dog who is loose and wiggly versus a dog who is really still. Stillness can definitely be a big warning sign. Avoidance is also a big issue. I have one specific example with this one that I use a lot because I was teaching a group reactivity class, and there was a dog in there who had attacked another dog. And they told me that it was, you know, without any warning, unprovoked. And what I found in class is this dog refused to look at any other dog in the room. She would have her nose to the ground the entire time. She was sniffing and doing everything she could to avoid getting close to other dogs or looking at them. And once she started, you know, getting closer to another dog, she would get more and more intense about her sniffing and avoiding. And that is something that people miss a lot. So if you feel like your dog is really avoiding looking at something, it can mean that they're very uncomfortable. Yawning, if your dog is not tired, can definitely be a stress signal. And so can lip licking. So in the pictures that I put here, we do have a few different stress signals happening. And these are just a moment in time. I don't know what these dogs were doing around this. They might be perfectly happy. But in these pictures, you can see the dog with the red coat has kind of a tight mouth and a furrowed brow, and the ears are pricked forward, which generally is more alert. The dog, the bulldog, has its tongue flicked out towards its nose and has its ears pressed back. So those are some things that would make me kind of pay a little more attention to that dog to see if they're showing other signs of stress, or that they might be afraid or over aroused in that situation. And when they are overstimulated, you know, or they are afraid, you know, that's usually our time to bail them out, to help them get into a safer situation, to get them somewhere calmer and quieter until they're able to feel comfortable again and calm down. So I want to just kind of go through my keys to success with reactivity to wrap up today. And so the first key to success, and we talked about this at the very beginning, is management. We do want to prevent our dogs from having problems. So we do not want to put them in situations where we know we're going to have an issue. We want to set them up for success and make sure that they are safe and that everyone around them is safe, including ourselves. And that's really what management is setting our dogs up for success and trying to not let them practice unwanted or undesirable behaviors. The next thing that I like to focus on with this is distance. And I think honestly, the one of the most common things that I hear from people that I'm working with is that they're struggling because it's hard, you know, when a dog pops around a corner, or you know, they unexpectedly have a dog come into their space, and that's real life, and we're going to have to deal with that. But as much as possible, we want to give our dog distance to be successful. The more distance that you have, the more likely your dog is to be able to do what you need them to do, to be able to be in their thinking brain and listening and being successful. So that is something to always be keeping in mind, as we do want to have a good amount of distance for our dogs from their triggers. And as they get better and as they're more successful, we can start to get them closer. But we want to work on that. That's stages we have to work through, kind of like going through grade levels in school. So, you know, we're not going to work on a college material until we've passed grade school. So don't do more than your dog is ready for, basically. Repetition is so important. That's how we learn. So, and how our dogs learn. We have to have things happen over and over again. So we need to set up our dogs to do some practice sessions where they can be successful, where they can do what you want them to do, whether that's just looking at the trigger and not reacting and getting rewarded for that, or doing the redirection cue. You know, we just want to set them up to have some chances to practice that. So that's going to be a huge part of being successful and your long-term success. Practice, basically. You've got to practice. And then reinforcement is also incredibly important. So we really want to make sure that our dogs are getting rewarded for their good behavior. And I always recommend using food because it is the thing that dogs want generally. There are some exceptions. I definitely have worked with dogs who preferred toys or preferred getting to run around or different things like that. But generally, food is what's called the primary reinforcer because dogs need it for survival. So most dogs are going to be pretty excited about getting good food. I do tend to use pretty high value stuff for this type of training. So actual, you know, meats and cheeses and things like that, freeze dried, different treats that you can get at places like, you know, Tomlinson's or PetSmart or Petco, or Chewy. You know, there's many treats out there that are great options, but I would pick the smelliest, meatiest, most exciting for your dog treats that you can, small pieces so you can do a lot, and always bring way more than you think you need when you're going to do a training session, because you will go through more than you think you're going to. But I think that one of the biggest differences I see between the average person with their dog and professional dog handlers and dog trainers is the professionals generally use a lot more reinforcement. And if you're watching them closely, even when they're not giving treats, a lot of times they're giving other reinforcement. So it is something to kind of keep in mind, and don't worry about giving too much reinforcement in the beginning, because later on you can use less once your dog understands the behavior. But if you use a lot of reinforcement at the beginning, and it's really things that your dog loves, they're going to learn the behavior better and they're going to be a lot more successful. And that's going to help you long term get to the point where your dog can really listen and do the cues that you need and be able to kind of get past issues like leash reactivity. So just to kind of sum up everything, I think that, again, leash reactivity is a really common issue. And we just want to help our dogs get out of that place of every time I see my trigger, I have to bark and lunge. And we want to help them understand what to do instead and help them to create good associations. And there are, you know, many other options and tools and games and great methods to work on these things. So if these don't work for your dogs, there are other choices and other things you can do. And there are many trainers available to help with that, including Miranda and the people at Every Dog, as well as myself. And you know, I would say don't hesitate to ask questions and reach out if you are not sure how to proceed with your dog. But what I always tell my students is there's going to be good days and bad days, but if you're making progress in the right direction, you're doing something right. So, you know, take those little victories and look for progress. And that's going to make a big difference. So this is my contact information. I'll leave that here for just a second while I finish up talking before we switch back for any questions. But I am always happy to answer questions if people have them. You can email me or call or text or use my website. I'm much better at responding to texts than phone calls, so I recommend that. But I am happy to answer questions and to help anyone that needs it. So hopefully that was helpful, and I am happy to answer any questions that are there.
Awesome, Sarah. That was great. And we do have a whole bunch of questions for you.
Oh, good.
Okay. There are a few things in here that I think you ended up covering right afterward, but I'll try and go through all of the questions, or at least in each theme. So the first couple of questions were about where to find harnesses that fit your individual dog, like a Corgi, and whether you like things like the Mendota. I'm guessing that's the slip lead Mendota.
Okay, so yeah, there are several harnesses that I like. The ones that I generally start with are the balance harness or rough wear front range or the perfect fit. The freedom harness is another one that works for some dogs well. It's a slightly more restrictive than I like, but some dogs do really great on it. I generally don't like as much things like the slip leads, just because I find that they tend to just, you know, they tighten, which, you know, can be a problem for tracheas and things like that. So they might help with like not coming out of the collar, but I think like a martingale collar is generally a better option for that. But yeah, that's the harnesses that I usually start with. And then, you know, some of them are a little more customizable. Like I know Perfect Fit has different sections you can buy separately to make sure it fits your dog's body. So.
We got a couple of questions about pulling on leash. So, you know, if they're pulling against the harness or if they're pulling on leash, how can I keep the leash relaxed?
That's a really good question. So I do think that working on leash walking is kind of part of working on leash reactivity. I didn't cover it today because it's a big topic, but what I do recommend is, you know, trying to just start with like standing somewhere with some treats and just getting your dog to pay attention to you and be close to you, because a lot of working on really leash reactivity and leash walking is teaching your dog to be able to disengage from the environment and focus back to you. And so if you can really work on some of those basic foundation behaviors like paying attention to you, that can help. Some of the harnesses, if you will have like front clips, or you can do double clips front and back, and that can sometimes help. For exceptionally strong dogs or situations where you're having a lot of trouble, in some cases, things like head halters can be an option, but I generally don't start with those because they take a lot more, you know, desensitization for the dog to get used to them. Not every dog likes to have something on their face. So we do want to make sure it's the right fit for the dog. We don't want to add any extra stress to them. But I would say, yes, working on pulling on the leash, it's a whole nother like, you know, hour or two of talking probably, but the main things are rewarding for walking next to your side and not reinforcing pulling by continuing forward when they pull.
Awesome. So we have a couple of questions about what to do if you have two dogs. So maybe one of them reacts, maybe both of them, maybe it differs based on what they're seeing.
If you do have two dogs and you're able to walk them separately while you're training, that's a lot easier. It's a lot more walking, but it's a lot easier. Or if there's two people in your household and you can have someone walk each individual dog, that can be helpful too. I do think that sometimes with two dogs, they feed off of each other a little bit. If one of them's barking, the other one might kind of join in. So we have to get them being successful on their own first, and then we can kind of try bringing them back together. And I know for a lot of people, the long-term goal is going on like a family walk with both dogs together. But for success reasons, it's a lot easier to work with them one-on-one first.
Awesome. So we've got a couple of folks who mentioned that they live in apartment buildings, or they say, my dog is at attention and looking for his triggers immediately upon stepping outside. Then on the walk, he's hypervigilant, he's swiveling from side to side. How do I even get out the door?
That is a really hard situation. And it, depending on the intensity of what's going on, sometimes it's a situation where you need to employ extra tools like either sometimes anxiety medications or supplements, which you would talk to your vet about, because you want them to be able to get into a mindset where they can learn. And if they're constantly having triggers around them, it's really hard to get into that mindset. Those can be a good tool. Another option definitely is to, try to reduce as much of the stimulation inside your apartment as you can with things like white noise or, other tools like that. And then when you do go out, try to go out at off times and find more open spaces so that you have more distance to stay away. But apartments are always tricky. And in a city like Austin, where we have lots of apartment dwellers. So a lot of my students live in apartments, and sometimes it is a video game or something, trying to get your dog out just to go to the bathroom. But there are solutions that you can kind of find.
And a couple quick things with that. One of them is if you do have the benefit of having a backyard, sometimes folks don't realize that it is just okay to let your dog go outside. They don't need to go for 3 walks a day every day if you're having all this reactivity. So while you're working on training, if anything, it's better to suspend walks in the meantime while you can work on it instead of practicing this behavior every time. Another key thing, especially if you're the person who dog starts amping up as soon as you put the shoes on and then the jacket on and then the leash, and they're getting more worked up in anticipation. One thing we can often do is break that chain. So we kind of switch some things up, and that gives us the ability to kind of break that chain so that they're not continuing to have the same thing kind of keep going in their minds every time. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Definitely agree with that. I think those are really, really good things. And it's a common misconception that dogs have to go for walks.
Yep.
They do not have to. If that's more stressful for them, it's not helpful.
Yep.
So
us apartment folks, obviously that doesn't work for us, but if you do have if you have another option, don't feel bad taking advantage of it. Use the tools you have.
Definitely.
One of the other questions that we got a bunch, and I know we get this a lot as trainers too, what do I do if when my dog sees the other dog, he won't take treats, or he's great with other dogs, but if he sees bicycles, he won't take treats? What do I do?
Yeah, so when they're not taking treats, and I meant to mention this, so I'm glad someone asked about that. Usually what that means is they're over threshold. So one of the things that we see a lot when dogs kind of start to go over that point where they're not thinking clearly anymore, they can't process things as well, they're not able to listen to cues as well, is they stop taking food, or some dogs will take food a lot harder and bite your fingers off, basically trying to take it. But a lot of dogs, if they are at a point where they can't handle it anymore, will stop taking food. So usually that means you need to get out of there. It means you need to go further away and work at an easier distance with your dog. And if it's a situation where they're kind of, already getting over a threshold and they're not in a good place, use that U-turn, get out of there as fast as you can. I have had dogs that I played run away like it was a game. I'll be like, it's time to run away, and then we go on a little jog across the field to get further away. So we want to keep upbeat and happy about it, but get them out of there as fast as you can if you're noticing that, because generally that means that they're not in a good place for learning.
Yep, absolutely. Let me see. Oh, a couple of people asked about other suggestions for how to keep dogs calm before the stressors even occur. So whether that's out on a walk before they see something or just in the house.
Yeah, there are some great things to work on with that. I love practicing relaxing on a mat for inside. So teaching your dog to lay down on a bed or a mat and relax. You can even take that outside to practice a little bit. you know, I think we think a lot about rewarding our dogs for doing things, but not a lot for rewarding our dogs for doing nothing. And a lot of times we want our dogs to do nothing. So finding calm behaviors to reward, whether that's laying down and relaxing or walking calmly next to your side. I love relaxation protocols. Dr. Karen Overall has a great one, and Suzanne Clothier has a great one. They're very different, but they both are, you know, teaching your dog to kind of lay down and relax and chill out, and that can be super helpful. So even just doing things like that. But sometimes if they're just overstimulated, going somewhere a little quieter and working on, you know, maybe petting them slowly, talking to them in a soft voice, or just letting them kind of absorb things and calm down, and rewarding them for good behaviors will start to reduce some of that.
Awesome. We got a couple questions about high value treats and one about high value vegan treats. So suggestions on your favorite high value stuff to use?
Yes, string cheese. I love string cheese. It's my favorite. I found very few dogs that don't love it, but if that's not enough for them, then I definitely will use chopped up meats. For really picky dogs, things like tripe, which smells awful, but you know, dogs love it. You can get like things like a little freeze dried, you know, beef liver and things like that. But I just bought a bag of treats for my cats that are just freeze dried minnows, and I've used them for dogs as well, and they love those. So they tend to like things that we think are gross. But I also would say it really depends on your dog. So you asked about like vegan treats, for example. And like my dog is obsessed with Brussels sprouts, and I don't give him that many because I don't want to feel the gas afterwards. But you kind of want to just find out like, what does your dog really get excited about? And I think it's kind of fun to do taste tests sometimes where you take like 4 or 5 treats and like see which ones they like the most and play with that. I know a lot of dogs love carrots, you know, frozen peas. I mean, there's lots of different things like that that can be really good options too. Just really, really depends on the dog and what they like. So high value is kind of defined by them.
Awesome. And there are some great responses in the chat. Some people said that
good.
their dogs liked frozen green beans or frozen peas, celery, carrots, blueberries, frozen mango. Somebody else has Brussels sprouts that they like, and sweet potato is another pretty easy one. But it is totally up to your dog. I've seen some dogs that go crazy for popcorn or for tortilla chips, things like that. So the biggest thing is to experiment. We sort of have internally like a treat scale for every dog that says, okay, here's the lowest thing he'll work for, and here's the highest thing that like I really want to reserve. And so we're really careful as trainers to make sure that if that tripe or if that popcorn or the green beans is like their number one possible thing, that we're only using it for this really important stuff, and we're not using it to teach sit at home because they'll work for Kibble for that. So making sure that we're careful about where we use, like she said, those $100 bills versus the $1 bill. We want to make sure that we're paying really highly for this stuff that we want.
Definitely.
So I think that so far that is most of the overall stuff. There was one other question about, you know, what do I do if even at a great distance, it feels like my dog is still reacting? You know, what do we do in those cases where it feels like we're already pretty far away?
Yeah, there are, you know, dogs that I would say have almost very little threshold or not much of a threshold. And, you know, I have one of those dogs. Actually, he's how I got into working with higher level behavior cases, because he's the most reactive dog I've ever met in my life. So Percy, who you guys saw practicing with the muzzle, is incredibly dog reactive. So with him, I literally had to go at quiet times of day to parks and sit like across like football field length distances to get anything done. I do recommend for people with dogs like that also reading Emma Parsons' book, Click to Calm, because she talks a lot about her dog who was very similar in that book. And there's a lot of good information in there about dogs who you don't have a lot of ways to practice with where they're below threshold. But that's another situation too where I would strongly suggest talking to your vet or a vet behaviorist about medication.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that, a lot of folks asked about, what do I do when my dog doesn't take treats, or what if I can't get further away? Sarah already talked a lot about threshold management and making sure that we're still in a place where the dog can kind of function and think. And so there's a fair amount that we can do to control that. We know that our dogs might have different thresholds for different things. So some of you mentioned, like, what about if the dog is reacting to my dog versus if they're not? Sometimes that can make a big difference. If they're behind a fence, that can make a big difference. If they're reactive to people, sometimes two people might be worse than one. But it also depends on the day. So just like humans, I might not scream at the lady at the grocery store. I mean, I'm not going to do that anyway. But if, I spilled my coffee, I got cut off on my way to work, and somebody at my work was rude to me, then I'm more likely to snap at something later. And so keep in mind that when a lot of stuff happens, it can often make your dog more likely to react to things. So kind of controlling the overall environment can be really important. And we also have to remember that the dog gets to decide what's too close. And so even if we feel like, oh my gosh, but we're so far away, to the dog, it's not far away enough. And granted, there are some times, like getting out of the apartment building, where you just don't have a choice. But wherever we can, we just have to try and go, okay, this is the dog I have today, so this is how far I have to be away from it. And if we're in a position where we reliably can't do that, that's when things like talking to a vet behaviorist can be really helpful, as Sarah said, to kind of give us a little bit more room to play in before the dog goes over a threshold and struggles to learn.
Yeah, I think it's really important to work with the dog that you have in that moment. And I would also say that I'm completely blanking on who said this, but I love the saying of, your dog isn't giving you a hard time, your dog is having a hard time. So just, your dog's not trying to do anything to make your life harder. They're struggling. And so we're trying to help them, get to a point where both of us can take a pleasant walk and not have to stress and worry.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be really stressful as a dog owner too, right? Like we
definitely
know that these are not easy things. Having worked with a lot of reactive dogs, we both know how frustrating it can be. So we're not the people who are going to be like, you should do this all the time and have a great attitude about it. And it's not that hard. It is that hard, and it can be really frustrating. So we are
absolutely
here to support you. We trainers, we know that it's not just, a magic wand and suddenly you can fix it. So these changes are hard, and some of our dogs have been practicing this for a very, very long time. So it takes
definitely. Definitely.
Any other questions? Now is your time. Speak now or forever hold your peas and carrots. And Sarah, do you have any last minute parting wisdom that you feel like everybody should know leaving this presentation?
I mean, I think I would just say, try to, listen to what your dog needs and find ways to communicate with them and to tell them what you're looking for, and really, reinforce those good behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah,
several folks have asked about, if they want to get one-on-one support or get more information. So you can reach out to Sarah. She had her information up before, but it's also bonddogtraining.com. If you want to reach out to us, you can look at everydogaustin.org. Again, we do have other webinars coming up. We offer, private consults, things like that. We have a fearful dog support group if you have a fearful dog who may also be reactive. As a reminder, we are a nonprofit, so if you'd like to make a donation, that would be awesome. But our biggest thing is, please tell your friends, let them know that we're offering cool stuff. We'll have more of it, and then we will send out this presentation link tomorrow if the internet plays well with us, so that you all have it, and you're welcome to share it with anybody that you'd like to. So please reach out. We're available. Some of you aren't in Austin, so there's only so much we can do. We can't get out to Colorado or Alabama to work with your dogs right now. But definitely reach out if you need any support. And thank you all so much for coming out on a Tuesday night to listen and learn. So we really appreciate you. And we have awesome trainers in our area. We're so thankful to have folks like Sarah to work with. So stay tuned, sign up for other webinars, and we hope to see you again soon. All right. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
All right. Bye.